What we're going to do now is just log into the Ravello portal. What I really love about this is that there's nothing to download, nothing to install, right? You just log in. The first thing you'll do is go to the Ravello website, the login button right there, and just log in. So as soon as you log in, you'll come to the screen which has a list of your existing applications. Since this is your first time, let's assume you're a first-time user, the first thing you'll do as a new user is come in and say, create new application. So I'm just going to go through this flow for you. Let's call it a VFD demo app. Going forward, you're going to create it using a blueprint. So I'll talk about how you can save this as a blueprint, and going forward, just use that to spin it up. But for now, let's create it from scratch. So as soon as you say create application, you come to the Ravello canvas. Now everything you do on this canvas represents your multi-VM application. So Naveen talked earlier about how we've taken a very application-centric view of the world, right? We're looking at it as a multi-VM app here. So everything you do here represents your multi-VM app. The first thing you want to do is go ahead and import your VMs. So the most common use case we see is customers bringing in their existing VMware or KVM VMs into Ravello. If you're familiar with Amazon or Google, you know that you typically end up having to do a conversion as you bring your VM from your data center into the public cloud. In the Ravello context, we don't do any VM conversions or changes. When I click on Import VM, it actually takes me to the VM uploader, where it asks me to select the source of my VMDK. In this case, if it's coming from VMware, it could be directly from vCenter. It could be maybe you've exported your VMDK, it's lying around on your C drive, D drive. Just go and grab that and hit upload. When you hit upload, it will actually grab your VMDKs and bring them in here into your private library. Right, so everything you see in that private library is your set of VMs that you've previously uploaded. So just like a cooking show, we've uploaded some VMs previously, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that up here. Let's think about a typical, CRM application. Maybe it's got 4 nodes, right? It's got my app server 1, it's got my app server 2, it's got my database VM on the back end, it's got a load balancer. So these are just VMDK files, right? My VM images. I drag and drop them onto the canvas. As soon as I do that, I've essentially told Ravello that these 4 VMs make up my application. So if I click on the network tab, you'll see that Ravello now detects the networking automatically. This we can do because your VMDK comes with certain metadata. It tells us if you had certain IP addresses. It tells us, for example, if you had multiple subnets. So you can see here what we've got is essentially 4 VMs. 2 of them are on one subnet. The other one is on a different subnet, and the other one is on a different subnet. If you had multiple NICs, maybe you had 3 NICs, we would detect that, and your VM would be configured with multiple NICs, with all your networking. So this is the overlay networking piece that Naveen mentioned earlier. So typically what most customers will do is just come in here, verify the networking, and say publish. If you wanted to, you could click on each VM and edit its properties as well, just like you do in vSphere, right? You can go ahead and say, change its CPU and memory size maybe. Click on disks and say add more disks. You can even add an ISO. This is something that you cannot do in Amazon today, right? But in Ravello, since we're trying to recreate your data center experience, you can go ahead and attach an ISO and boot from there. You can click on the networking tab, and as you can see, you can choose your device types, right? VMXNet3, VirtIO, what have you. If you had public IPs assigned, that means you can go ahead and access it from the outside. If I click on advanced here, you'll see something interesting. Things like VLANs. Again, this is something that you cannot do in the public cloud, but you're so used to doing this in your data center. So we went ahead and enabled things like VLANs for you within our overlay networking. I know Gil is going to do a deeper dive into exactly how we do this, so that should be pretty interesting. But for now, let's just say cancel because, I reviewed it, looks pretty good. What I want to do now is publish my application. When I say publish, I really mean I'm ready to instantiate this application in the cloud, right? So what I'm looking at on the screen here, it actually tells me how many VMs I have, how many CPUs, memory, and then it asks me where do I want to boot this application up. This is the most interesting part. I can literally do a drop down, choose whether I want it in Amazon or Google. Let's say I want it in Amazon. I can pick my region, right? Whether it's Virginia, Singapore, Sao Paulo, you name it. Typically, you're looking at pre-prod environments, right? So we went ahead and set up an auto stop. We don't want you to forget that you're running an application in the cloud. So most common use case here is 2 hours later, your QA automated tests have completed. Your application will self-destruct after 2 hours. So that's very useful. You can click on detailed pricing here to see what it's going to cost you. This particular one, 4 VMs, 56 cents per hour. If I choose optimize for cost, notice how the pricing changes, and it now went down to 42 cents per hour. What happened there was you told Ravello, this is a pre-prod environment. I don't really care. Just pick the best cloud for me. So we picked the cheapest cloud, and we're going to go ahead and publish it there. So once we hit publish, you'll actually see where it published, but also the price dropped immediately. So let me click publish, and you'll see these little blue icons, and we chose to publish this in Google Cloud US Central 1. And in about 3 to 4 minutes, the VMs will be up and running. Your application will be booted in the cloud. I think we actually booted it up just to show you what it'll look like. Once it's up and running, this is what it'll look like, right? All the VMs have gone green. Again, cookery show example. We had a pre-booted environment. But what you're going to see now is if I click on my load balancer, I have a DNS and a public IP that I can go ahead and access my application just like it's running in my data center, right? So this is just the basic flow the first time you set up your application. What most users will do is after everything's booted up, looks great, you've played around with it, you want to click on Save as Blueprint. This is really important because, hey, you've done all this work, you want to be able to come back to this application later. When you say Save as Blueprint, we're going to take a multi-VM snapshot of your entire application and save it for you in your private library. So you can come back maybe a week later and boot up the exact same application using a blueprint. It'll take you about 2 clicks and 5 minutes to get it up and running. And once you have that blueprint in your library, right, I can show you blueprint library here. You have a set of blueprints in your library. You can then go ahead and share these blueprints, whether you want to share it with your colleagues, right, or you want to share it with somebody outside the company. It's pretty easy to do. We've enabled blueprint sharing. So let's say tomorrow Alistair wanted to share an Autolab blueprint with Luke. He could go ahead and do that fairly easily. So there you have it. That's our very basic demo in a nutshell.
Shared with everyone.
So when you build an application blueprint, do you also include things in there like IP address changes? So if I have like developers each wanting to clone an environment to test something different, they can each get their own subnets or change their IPs?
That's actually a great question. What happens is each time we boot up the application, we're running it in a completely fenced L2 network.
Okay.
So if you went ahead and created 5 copies of it, it would each be in a fenced environment, so you don't have to go ahead and change the IPs for each one.
Oh, nice.
So how do you get into that L2, that fenced network from the outside? Do you have to?
One of the VMs would have a public IP address and a DNS name, which would change. So each of the 5 environments would have, let's say, a web server, and they would get a different DNS name, and you can just access it through that, either browse to it or SSH to it or RDP to it or whatever.
Okay.
So we should architect that into what we
Yeah,
build.
there's actually not much to do. You just need to enable a public IP. So when
It's nothing you guys are
go ahead.
automatically
Show the
doing.
services, Shruti, and you can.
So what you can do is, if you look at this particular VM, let's focus on the load balancer here. You'll see that we've enabled SSH and web on it. So if I click on services, we've basically said that we want this to be an external IP. Right now, if we assign an external IP, each time I spin this up, if I go to the summary tab, this IP that's generated is going to be new. Right, so we'll generate a new public IP for each application environment. So you can even do everything that I just showed you through an API call, right? So maybe you'll have an API call that says, spin up this blueprint and we'll return the public IP for you to go and access that.
Yeah, and the public to private IP is fully NATed. So from the VM's perspective, everything is exactly the same.
How about anything with an existing VPC or something? If I've got a VPN tunnel already nailed up to AWS, for instance,
Yeah,
can I place these blueprints inside that?
Unfortunately not. The way this works, and this is something we should clarify, is that Ravello, think of Ravello as a cloud service. So a customer would be a customer of Ravello's, and through Ravello they would then deploy to Amazon or Google. Turns out it's actually in our account, and then at the end of the day we provide the customer with a bill. So we don't have the option right now of being able to deploy into your own VPC if you already have an Amazon VPC. This would, of course, you can continue to use that for whatever you're using it for, but for the use cases in which you're using Ravello, it would be deployed to the Ravello account.
Okay.
And that's a great point because it also has implications on pricing. The pricing that we showed you includes your cloud VMs as well. So you're getting one bill from Ravello. You don't have to have an Amazon account or a Google account or anything. All you get is one single consolidated bill from Ravello, and we'll show you that you used this much in Amazon, this much in Google, for example.
So I don't have to do business at all with the cloud providers.
Not at all.
You do, but the cloud provider is Ravello.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true. Yeah. But I've shared with some of you the fun of dealing with end user license agreements and state and governmental agencies trying to deal with cloud end user license agreements and stuff like that. Yeah. So
Yeah. So in our
offers me
case,
hope.
And just to be clear, there's no way that we can use Ravello to set up a VPN tunnel.
Oh, you can.
You can, okay.
Can,
Yeah.
absolutely. So the way you would do that in this application environment is, say, for example, this 4 VM application needed to access some services in your data center, right?
maybe your database was back in the data center.
Your database is back in the data center, yeah. And what you would do in that case is you'd have you drag and drop another VM on it. It could be like a Cisco VPN or a Fortinet VPN, whichever your VPN vendor is. And they have a VM version, typically a VMware VM version. You could just use that and set up a connection back to your data center.
Okay.
In that case, though, keep in mind that when you take a blueprint of that and you want to spin up 5 copies, you just need to make sure that you change the access in each one of the VPNs. So that's something that is possible right now, and you can do it in several different ways: SSL VPN, IPsec VPN, whatever you want.
Okay. But the blueprint that we'd be importing into this, we would need to provide that. There's not like a checkbox on here that says add a VPN.
No, not yet. But we do have some in the public library. There are some. There is a VPN, a pfSense VPN device that we provide. So we make it a little bit easier to try to set it up, but it isn't a checkbox thing yet.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so we have like a pfSense VM that you can just grab from the library, right?
Okay.
Now, do you tie in with any orchestration software like Puppet or Chef so that if we want to test a deployment in an application that we've already built, we can throw our runbook in there and press the button and let it run?
Yes. So from a high level, what we've got integration with Chef already, and with other tools like Puppet and Ansible, you can do it through Cloud Init, which is a boot up script that's there. Mm-hmm. So you can basically run anything you want when you start up, and that could access a repository or a cookbook set of things that could be sitting. As long as it's accessible, you'll be able to boot it up with that.
You said earlier about the external access. Mm-hmm. Look at this VM, SSH is enabled, whatever. How does that tool know what services are being offered by the OS of the VM?
you have to set it up manually. So you've got to define on that VM that, we did that earlier, so you probably didn't see that, but it's a good question. When you start off with a VM, it won't have any external services at all, defined in the Ravello network, right? You would then say, I want to add SSH or add RDP or add whatever custom service that you want. Tell us which port it is, and we would then go ahead and open that port. Essentially, it's a NAT rule that Gil was talking about earlier.
So that's a network layer filter, what the firewall policies are allowing, not necessarily representative of what the VM is offering.
Correct. That's another very good point. The VM has to offer those services as well. So for example, if you have a Windows VM and you enable RDP at the Ravello network layer, but RDP is not running in the VM, you will not be able to RDP to it, right?
That's what I was getting at. Great.
Exactly. So you need to
Truly
make sure.
emulating our enterprise network.
Yeah, exactly. You need to make sure that.
Think about it.
Can you click advanced there under the supplied services? Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yep.
So that's a very basic demo. Keep those questions coming. In the meantime, I want to hand it back to Naveen to talk about some of the core use cases, what we're seeing customers do with it, right? It gets a lot more interesting.
Yep. Thanks, Shruti. That was really good. Let me go back to just a couple of things here that'll help illustrate. We talked about taking nested virtualization and trying to build a layer which would allow you to replicate your data center infrastructure in the public cloud. That's how we started. So what Shruti showed you was a demo that essentially kind of does that. But I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes before we ended this session to give you a bit of an overview in terms of how this is not just, technology for technology's sake. There's a lot of real-world users and customers that are benefiting from some pretty amazing use cases out here. The first one is a company called 888 Holdings. It's not as known here in the US, but in Europe it's a pretty big organization. They're one of the leading online gaming companies. And they had a really pretty acute business problem. Their application environment consisted of about 275 virtual machines, mostly Windows, multiple domain controllers, F5 load balancers, Fortinet firewalls. They had 50 different subnets and VLANs in their environment, okay? And what they used to do was to build out these environments in their enterprise data center on VMware. And it used to take them about, I think, a couple of months to stand up one such environment. You can imagine, it's pretty complex. They did a fair amount of automation, but it was still fairly complex to get those things up and running. And from a business viewpoint, the business units needed multiple environments pretty quickly because they were expanding into international geographies. And for each country or each region that they wanted to expand to, they needed a dev environment, a QA environment, maybe a certification staging type of place. So if every environment now takes a good couple of months to get spun up, you can see how something like this would slow the business down. So they knew they needed to use the cloud in some way. And they actually tried several times to take this really complex application environment and spin that up in Amazon, but it was very difficult for them to do that. In fact, they couldn't do it primarily because of the networking complexity. Because of all the Fortinet firewalls, the F5 load balancers, all these multiple domain controllers that they had, it gets very complicated. And they couldn't do it without changing their application a lot. And they realized, hey, if we change our application, then it's different from what's running in the data center. So it was a very difficult problem for them to solve. But with Ravello, they were able to now, set it up once they uploaded their data. I think there was about 18 terabytes of data. Once they uploaded that, it's fairly seamless for them now. And within about half an hour, they can click one button. Half an hour later, they have a full-fledged environment that's running. They use it for dev, QA, whatever, and shut it down when they're done. So this is something that's been fundamentally game-changing for them in terms of their operations and how quickly they're able to add business value. So that's one example I wanted to point out of this technology in the real world. The other one. And actually, if you think about it, if I may just use the whiteboard here for one moment, it'll be a little bit clear. So if I plot a chart of, think of this as the data center demand and supply we'll draw two lines, and you think of this as a dimension of time. If you look at a traditional pattern, and I'm simplifying it, but this is the demand typically, and this is the supply that the data center has. It's just artificial for a moment to illustrate the point here. When we started Ravello, we thought our business is going to be around capitalizing on these peaks. And by the way, when I say demand here, I'm not talking about traffic in general. I'm talking about the number of environments. And I was talking to Luke about this last night. It's really important to see. So when you think about the production environments you have and the need that you have for development and QA environments, pre-production environments, this is the curve that I'm drawing, okay? And what we thought in the beginning when we started Ravello, trying to solve this problem, we thought this would be our business. Ravello is trying to solve that part of the problem in that curve. And certainly the 888 example illustrates that. But we found something actually even more interesting, we think. And that's my next story. And this is around Checkpoint. Checkpoint is one of the leading firewall vendors out there. And they had a conference for all of their channel partners. And there were about 1,000 system engineers that they all got together in Las Vegas to actually get them trained and show them some of the new products and stuff like that, right? And ideally, they wanted to do hands-on labs for these engineers. And there are about 1,000 of them. They needed, each one of them needed an environment. Each environment had 5 or 6 VMs. We're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 VMs that you need for one day. One day. So think about how complex it is to get 5,000 to 6,000 VMs in a particular location. You'd have to ship all kinds of hardware, have all kinds of people, going there to do it. And it's a really complex operation. And besides, you have to have hardware sitting around idle for the rest of the year, pretty much, except for this event, which just think about the inefficiency and the waste in that sort of, economic model. But with Ravello, because we can do complex layer 2 networking, we can take VMware VMs, and they had a VMware appliance. You just simply run that in the cloud. It becomes a very easy value proposition. So whenever somebody needs an environment, you click the button 1,000 times or use an API call. You've got 1,000 environments up and running. You use it for 8 hours, and then you shut it down when you're done. So the whole point is when you make these things accessible, these environments really easy and really accessible, we find that people use it a lot more. This is not any different of an analogy than when VMware introduced virtualization in the x86 world. It led to people spinning up a lot of VMs because it was easy, it was possible, and it helped a lot in terms of solving very real problems, as we all know today. So what we're seeing, if you put it in a business context, is that actually it's more like this. When people have the ability to spin up these, the demand actually increases. And it's kind of like, I don't like to use the Uber example too much, but it's sort of conceptually like what happened with Uber, where the San Francisco taxi market is $150 million before they started. Everybody said, oh, when Uber starts, we're going to see Uber get most of that $150 million. No. I mean, they certainly did, but the market size increased to $450 million. Why? Because it's so easy, it's so accessible, it's so convenient that people use it as a real option. And that's what we're beginning to see as well. We're really excited with where we are.